Hello there. I just want to get on and sort of introduce myself to this vinyl community that I have recently discovered on YouTube. During 2010, I started posting some videos of albums that I had been listening to recently. I did one every month or every couple months called LP Front Burners. But at that point I had no idea that there was this vinyl community on YouTube. Since having discovered it, I just think this is just really cool. Everybody getting on here and sort of talking about their passion for music and showing off the albums that they've recently found or that they're recently getting into, and they just, so their favorites, that sort of thing. In a sense, that's what I was trying to do with my LP Front Burners, and I plan to continue the LP Front Burners. In a way, for me, that's a showcase of the stuff that I've been listening to lately, and it does sort of fit into the recent finds category as well, because probably at least 50% of any of the stacks that I've flipped through in any of those videos are recent finds. Very often what I'll do is I bring them home and I clean them up, and then I put them in a stack to play. Even if it's an album that I've heard before, I put them in the stack to play. So a lot of what you'll see if you've looked at any of those LP Front Burner videos, I would say at least 50 or 60% of it is recent finds, things that I've come across recently. But I guess in a way, what I'm trying to do with this video, because I think that this vinyl community that's out there is just really cool. And I love everyone sharing their passion for music. I've been watching an awful lot of videos. I haven't commented on as many as I've watched, certainly. But I think it's great. I mean, people with small collections, people with big collections, people with obscure collections, people with fairly mainstream collections. But everybody getting on here and just talking about their passion for music and their passion for vinyl in particular. And I just think that's great. So in a way, what I'm trying to do here with this video is kind of say, hey guys, can I play too? So hopefully you don't mind me sort of sneaking in and pushing my way into this little community. Just a little bit about me. I'll try not to make this too long. My name's Rob. I started listening to music, serious music, I suppose, good music, however you want to define that. I started listening to music that I thought mattered when I was about 10 or 12 years old. 10, 11, 12, somewhere in there. I don't really remember. What I do remember is that I had a close and play phonograph. I don't know if any of you remember those, but they were basically little boxes, and you would open up the top, and then there was this little record player in there. And, anyway, I had one of these things, and some friends of mine and I were, we were playing stuff on them, but at the time it was things like, Peter, Paul and Mary's Puff the Magic Dragon, and, whatever records that my parents would have or their parents would have or whatever. And one of my friends had an older brother who was into rock and roll. And I remember one day, this friend of mine, he took a handful of 45s from his older brother and came over to my house, and we ended up plopping them down on the close and play phonograph and playing them. And one of those was a single for Hey Jude, the Beatles' Hey Jude. And we were listening to a lot of the things that they brought over, and that may have been somewhere near the beginning of the stack, but Hey Jude was okay. It was a song. It didn't really jump out at me, and I apologize to any diehard Beatles fans for saying that Hey Jude is just a song, but it really didn't hit me. On the B side of that single, though, was Revolution. And as a, preteen, that thing just blew me away. I had never heard anything like that before in my life. And something tripped. Some sort of trigger, some sort of switch flipped. And suddenly, I wanted to hear more of that kind of stuff. I'm proud to say that I actually do have that single. It's not the same single. Because Steve ended up taking it and giving it back to his brother, probably rightfully so. And So, but at some point after that, I managed to acquire this. We've got Hey Jude on that side, and then Revolution on the Open Apple side. And I'm actually, I feel like I should frame that thing, because that's really what changed everything for me musically. Anyway, shortly after that, I had a cousin who was a member of the Columbia House Record Club, and had not really purchased any full-length vinyl LPs at that point. I just had a handful of singles that I had picked up. And so he was in the Columbia House Record Club and got me to join. I was like playing a lot of his records when we'd get together, when our families would visit each other, and I had a pretty strong passion for the records that he had, and probably a pretty strong jealousy too. And so, he told me about the deal with the Columbia House Record Club, and I don't remember how many you would get just for signing up, and then, every month, how those clubs tend to work. Anyway, that was the start of my vinyl buying, and I pretty much just, would buy things as often as I could afford them at that point. Shortly after that, well, maybe not shortly after that, I think while I was still in the Columbia House Record Club, I ended up going to some record stores in the area. I lived in Northeast Ohio, in the Cleveland area at the time. And I started going to some record stores and doing some crate digging. As a teenager, I didn't have a lot of money, so brand new vinyl wasn't always that accessible to me. I would get some as gifts, or if it was something I really, really wanted, I saved up for it. But for the most part, I would go to the budget bins and do some crate digging. And sometimes end up just buying things just because the cover looked interesting. But that in itself actually kind of sparked something else, because I would discover this music that I hadn't heard on the radio and I hadn't heard any other friends talking about. But I bought it because the cover looked kind of cool, and I mean, they weren't always winners, but I would open one up and I would play it, and sometimes, wow, what is this? This is cool, and it would take me off in another direction. Sometimes the music was rather experimental. So, at least it felt experimental to me at the time. So anyway, that kind of took me deeper and deeper into music, and I was definitely okay with that. Started spinning some records at friends' houses. I can remember several friends at the time. We would just get together and we would place records for each other. We would, spin whatever. I'd bring some things that I recently got, and they would bring some things that they recently got, and we'd play things for each other. And one of the things that I think is so cool about this vinyl community on YouTube is that it reminds me so much of those days of going to friends' houses and spinning records and showing each other the new records we bought, and talking about them, and talking about the bands, and talking about the music, and playing the music. And I know that this isn't the same thing, but it's so similar to me that I just, not only do I feel like I'm transported back there, but I'm really enthusiastic about being part of this community. So I think that's pretty cool. Anyway, fast forward a little bit to, let's say, 1985 or so. CDs are hitting the scene. They're starting to be pretty big. I ended up, by that time, I think I had amassed somewhere between 800 and 1,000 albums. But in the several years that followed that, those have come to be called, a friend of mine, Blake, hey Blake, a friend of mine has dubbed those the stupid years. And they really were, because what happened is that I was so enthusiastic about this new format, and the industry was spending an awful lot of time and effort convincing me that vinyl was a thing of the past, and that after a while you weren't even going to be able to find a turntable. So what I ended up doing at that point was I started selling albums. It wasn't like I brought my entire collection in a truck to a record store and said, "What do you give me for this?" But I would sift through things and find things that I really didn't listen to that much anymore, and I'd put them in a crate, and then I'd take them to the record store and I'd get some money for it. And basically the money that I was getting for it was so that I could buy CDs, which were much more expensive than albums. And this went on for a couple years until at one point I had taken every David Bowie album that I had and brought it to the record store. I didn't have an entire collection of David Bowie, but I brought whatever I had, maybe a half a dozen David Bowie albums, to the record store. And when I sold them to the record store, I didn't even have enough money from that sale to buy a David Bowie Greatest Hits CD. And at that point, another little switch flipped in my head, and I thought, this is stupid. Whether or not I'm going to be able to find a turntable in the future, I've got one now, and I'm unloading all this vinyl and getting dirt for it, getting nothing for it. So I stopped at that point. I can't say that I actually started buying more vinyl at that point. Vinyl was less and less available during those years. So probably from the late 80s, maybe 88, 89 through, well, really for the next 10 years, through 98 or 99, I didn't buy any albums. I would buy CDs, but I didn't buy albums, vinyl at all. 1998, 1999, somewhere around there, maybe 2000, a couple things happened that changed my vinyl collecting, and changed my vinyl collection, certainly. The first one was that the college, I teach at a college, a community college in the area, and they still had most of their vinyl collection. And yet, because it had been 15 years almost since the CD came out, and they had been purchasing a lot on CD and really not buying anything on album, they had rows of stacks of vinyl that they were trying to find a home for. And one of the librarians knew that I was interested in music, and I suppose interested in vinyl as well. And she asked me if I wanted to come over and take a look at some of the albums. And apparently they had been picked through already by the music teachers. The music teachers had set aside what they wanted for teaching purposes. But pretty much everything else was available, and they were taking them out of the stacks and making big piles of them and everything. So they asked if I wanted to go through and take anything that I wanted. And of course I did. And I ended up, there were too many there to actually start sorting through, looking at each one individually to see if it was, in good condition or in bad condition. So I ended up basically taking every title that I had any interest in whatsoever, in rock and in jazz and in folk music, and I didn't really mess around with classical too much. I did take some, but all sorts of different music. You can imagine what a college library might have in terms of music. So I took all that home. I took home at least one truckload of boxes of albums, and then when I got them home, I started going through them there. And of course, a lot of them turned out to be, because they're library albums, a lot of them turned out to be not in the greatest shape. But there were still some winners there. This is kind of a different story, so I'll leave that for another time. Anyway, around the same time, I was also hanging around with some guys in Milwaukee that I had met, and they were audiophiles. One of them actually ran a business that sold high-end audio equipment out of his house. And they would get together every so often and play music for each other, usually based on categories. And I got involved with this group, and because they were selling high-end audio equipment, the whole vinyl thing was part of the vernacular there. And so between that and the collection that I got from the college library, I really got back into vinyl big time. And so anyway, that's kind of where I am today. I hope this wasn't too long and drawn out. I'll see if I can edit it down a little bit post-production. But anyway, I just wanted to introduce myself. Again, my name's Rob, and say hello to everybody in the vinyl community out there, and hope that I'm allowed in the club, because I think it's a pretty cool club.